A rusted cage clattered beneath the fading glow of autumn lights at the Coeur d'Alene Lakeside Fair. Inside, 3 German Shepherd pups huddled together, trembling. Above them, a crooked scrap of cardboard dangled, its words more insult than offer, $7 for all. An off-duty Marine stopped in his tracks, his weathered K-9 freezing beside him. One paused from memory, the other from instinct. The shepherd let out a low growl. The Marine's hand moved toward his wallet. That quiet decision would unravel a ring of cruelty, transform 3 terrified pups into family, and awaken an entire town to its compassion. What follows will stir your heart and renew your belief in second chances. Before we dive in, share with me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe that no soul, man or animal, should be abandoned, hit subscribe. This story might just restore your faith in miracles. The October evening settled over Coeur d'Alene like a quilt of ember and gold. Carnival lights rippled across the lake, broken by a sharp autumn breeze. Clouds drifted low, tinged copper by the sun's last glow, while the fairground stretched like a temporary city alive with neon, laughter, and music. Scents swirled through the air, caramel apples, roasted peanuts, fried dough, mingling with the faint tang of wood smoke from vendor stalls. Yet beneath the celebration, shadows lingered, and in the darker corners of the fair, not everything was innocent. Luke Maddox walked slowly among the crowd, broad-shouldered beneath a worn navy jacket. 35 years old, he carried himself with the quiet command of a Marine. His face bore the stern lines of experience, a square jaw, and faint creases carved not only by years, but by the weight of decisions made in deserts far from Idaho. Chestnut hair, clipped close, showed early flecks of gray at the temples. His blue-gray eyes, steady and watchful, softened little even under carnival lights. Since returning home on leave, Luke wrestled with the silent soldiers bring back, the echoes of fallen comrades, endless patrols, radios alive with urgency. The fair was meant as distraction, but Luke's eyes scanned corners and faces more than the games and rides. At his side trotted Valor, his 9-year-old German Shepherd, once decorated in the Marine Corps' K-9 unit. His sable coat was streaked with silver across the muzzle and haunches, and one ear bent at the tip, scarred from an old training injury. Though his stride showed age, his presence was still noble. More than a service dog, Valor was Luke's comrade, a brother who had saved his life more than once. Retirement loomed, but Luke couldn't picture life without him. Valor was his anchor, the living tie between battlefield and fragile civilian peace. The fair buzzed with color, couples hand in hand, children darting toward candy stalls, carousel music rising above it all. Luke loosened Valor's leash, letting the shepherd sniff through the sugary haze. Then Valor froze, body taut, ears pitched forward, amber eyes narrowing. Muscles coiled, nails scraping gravel, he pulled sharply toward the fair's edge. Luke knew that stance. He had trusted it in raids and border patrols, when Valor sensed what no man could. "What is it, boy?" Luke murmured. "Steady." A guttural bark split the carnival noise. Valor tugged him past laughter and lights, into the dim outer fringe where shadows gnawed at tents. One weak bulb buzzed overhead, barely holding the dark back. Leaning against a sagging booth stood Beau Landry, late 40s, once muscular but now softened by drink and laziness. His flannel was stained, collar rumpled, and the reek of stale beer clung to him. His cheeks were ruddy, his eyes small and restless, darting like a man forever sniffing for a cheap buck. His grin was empty, sly, the kind that thrived on people's willingness to look away. Beau was a regular at county fairs, drifting with the rides, selling whatever earned $1, sometimes trinkets, sometimes lives with no price except the one scrawled on cardboard. At his feet sat a rusted cage shoved beneath the warped counter. Inside, 3 half-starved shepherd pups pressed against each other. Patchy fur, ribbed sharp beneath thin coats, eyes too big for their faces. One scraped its paw weakly against the bars, not hope, just instinct. The sign above them wavered in the breeze, 7 for all. Luke's breath caught. Beside him, Valor stood rigid, hackles raised, a deep rumble thrumming in his chest, not anger, but memory. Recognition. He had once been unwanted, too. Luke felt it like a strike, the echo of Valor's own abandonment before the Marines had given him purpose. Not far from the booth, a thin boy stood clutching balloons, their colors bobbing against the night. Toby Reed, 10 years old, with sandy hair and sleeves too long on his worn sweatshirt, stared at the pups. His hazel eyes brimmed with a desperate wish he couldn't afford. 2 years earlier, his father had died in a worksite accident. His mother worked nights cleaning offices. Selling balloons was his way of helping, a child's attempt to fill the emptiness at home. The hardship had etched him with seriousness beyond his years, though beneath it, compassion glowed unspoiled. "I've got $6, Toby whispered, clutching the strings tighter. "Just 6. Wish it was enough." Bo's laugh was thick and mocking. "7 for the lot." "Less than a meal, officer," he sneered, noting Luke's military bearing. "Take M or leave M. Saves me the trouble of scraps." Luke knelt, meeting the pups' wide eyes. They shivered tighter together, until one raised its head, gaze wet with plea. Valor lowered his muzzle to the bars, letting out a soft whine, the same sound he once gave when Luke bled in desert dust. That sound cut deeper than any battlefield scream. Luke straightened, jaw tight. "They're coming with me." Bo spread his arms, smirking. "Then pay the tag, Marine." Luke pulled his worn wallet from his pocket, thumbed through its meager stack, and pressed a 5 and 2 ones into Bo's greasy hand. 7. The cage creaked open. For a moment, silence settled over the corner of the fair. Toby's eyes widened, Bo muttered about fools, and the pup stumbled forward, into a future none of them yet imagined. It was only $7. Just a latch turned. But destinies shifted that night, for the pups, for Valor, for Luke, and for the quiet town of Coeur d'Alene. Rain chased Luke Maddox out of town, drumming steady on the roof of his old pickup. The carnival glow faded in the mirrors, swallowed by the pines lining the wet road. Beside him sat Valor, tall and vigilant in the passenger seat, eyes flicking back to the rear bench where the pups curled inside a wool blanket Luke had dug from beneath the spare tire. Their whimpers rose and fell with the hum of tires on gravel, sometimes swallowed by the hiss of rain, sometimes sharp enough to remind Luke they were alive, but fragile. At the bend of a narrow lane stood his cabin, a weathered wooden house built by his grandfather. Its slanted roof sagged under decades of Idaho snow, and the porch leaned, but it held. Since Luke's divorce 5 years earlier, silence had ruled here, echoing in every room. But tonight, he stepped through the storm with a bundle that promised to change it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old pine smoke. Luke knelt by the hearth, laying the pups on a quilt. Their fur was patchy, clumped with mud, but when they nosed timidly toward Valor, something shifted. The old shepherd sniffed each one carefully, then delivered a firm lick to the smallest pup's ear. It wasn't indulgence, it was command, an inspection of recruits. Luke chuckled quietly. "Already there, Sergeant, huh?" Valor wagged once, then settled in a crescent around the pups, chest steady, eyes alert. Luke moved toward the stove, setting a kettle to boil, when a knock rattled against the door, brisk, not hurried. On the porch stood Irene Foster, his neighbor 2 cabins down. 71 years old, wiry and small, she carried her years like armor. Her hair was white, twisted into a bun, her eyes gray and sharp. In one hand she held a jar of warm milk, in the other a folded wool blanket. "I heard barking," she said, her voice both stern and kind. "Saw you come up the path with something under your coat. Thought I'd better check before you froze the poor things." Luke stepped aside. "Come in, ma'am. They're by the fire." Her gaze landed on the pups, and she drew in a sharp breath. Kneeling with surprising ease, she spread the blanket and brushed a trembling head with her wrinkled hand. "Oh, you poor darlings. Her eyes softened with memory. I lost a shepherd mix when I was a girl. Name was Duke. He was stolen, back when fighting rings crept through this county. Never saw him again. I suppose I've been feeding strays ever since, paying back what was taken. Luke stirred the fire quietly. He recognized the timbre of a wound long carried. They won't be stolen this time, he said. The kettle whistled. He poured warm milk into a shallow dish, setting it by the pups. They hesitated until Valor barked softly, like an order. Then they stumbled forward, muzzles dunking clumsily, white froth smearing their faces. Irene laughed, the sound like wood cracking, warm and sharp. Luke found himself smiling too, a rare thing. A sudden creak on the porch made them turn. The door was still open. No knock this time. On the threshold sat a small paper bag tied with string, a silver star-shaped balloon looped through the knot, swaying in the wind. Luke stepped into the rain. Down the lane, blurred by water, he glimpsed a thin figure running, arms pumping, sweatshirt flapping. Toby Reed. Inside the bag was a small pouch of kibble, likely bought with the $6 he had earned selling balloons. Luke tied the balloon to a chair. It floated in the dim cabin light, fragile as hope. The pups stirred a commotion. One toppled into the dish with a squeak, splashing milk across the quilt. Luke let out a laugh, short, surprised, genuine. Irene smiled until her eyes crinkled. The fire burned low, the pups nestled against Valor's chest, his tail curled protectively around them. For the first time in years, the cabin wasn't oppressive. It was alive, with fire crackles, soft whimpers, steady breathing, Irene's quiet hum. Then came a new sound, tires crunching gravel. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Headlights swept across the cabin walls before vanishing. Luke parted the curtain. A dark pickup idled at the tree-line. Rain glinted off its hood. It lingered too long before turning, tail lights glowing red until the forest swallowed them. Luke let the curtain fall. Behind him, Valor was already alert, ears forward, body rigid, eyes meeting his master's with the same message they had shared in war zones. Stay ready. The rain hammered harder on the roof. But inside, the firelight held. The pups slept under Valor's chin. Irene gathered her shawl, promising to bring more blankets tomorrow. Luke sank into his chair, the silver balloon bobbing above the pups. The storm raged outside. But within those wooden walls, something had begun, a fragile family, an unspoken vow, and the warning of eyes watching from the dark. The next afternoon, Luke worked on his porch rail, hammer in hand, the mist still clinging to the pines. Peace was brittle, the memory of headlights lingering outside his cabin hadn't left him. Then the sound came again. Tires crunching gravel. This time deliberate, not passing. A black pickup rolled to a stop. From it climbed Royce Madigan, late 30s, broad-shouldered, built thick from brawls, not labor. A leather jacket, scarred from years of use, clung to him, rain streaking across his scarred cheek. His pale blue eyes, cold and calculating, swept the yard. Cigarette smoke curled from his lips, carrying the stench of oil and whiskey. Royce's reputation had spread long before this day. His father had run dog fights on the county's outskirts, Royce inherited the cruelty like a family trade. Whispers said he bred dogs in barns and abandoned trailers, selling them into circuits stretching north to Montana. People feared him, not just for the animals he broke, but for the violence in his own fists. Luke set down the hammer, shoulders squaring. Valor had already leapt from the porch, bristling, stance rigid. From inside came the muffled yips of pups. Royce smirked. So, the Marine plays savior. Picked up some mutts at the fair, thought you were doing charity. Problem is, they weren't scraps. They were mine. $7 worth of my bloodline. Luke's tone was calm, clipped, the steadiness of battlefield command. They're not bloodlines. Their lives. And here, they'll be treated as such. Rain dripped from the eaves, the only sound. Then Royce stepped closer, boots grinding in the mud. Think a few dollars give you claim. Those pups came from my lines. Men pay for that. His grin twisted, pride laced with cruelty. Valor surged forward, growl low and rolling, amber eyes locked on Royce like steel. At the lane's edge, Irene Foster appeared, basket hooked on her arm. Small and wiry against Royce's looming figure, her voice still cut sharp. This town's seen enough of your kind, Royce Madigan. Her gaze didn't waver. My Duke was stolen years ago. Folks said it was your father's men. These rings don't disappear, they just change hands. Royce chuckled, spitting into the mud. Old wounds, old lady. Not my fault if dogs go missing. Another voice cracked the tension. Small, nervous, but burning with urgency. It was him, Mr. Maddox. From the trees emerged Toby Reed, thin frame trembling, cap pulled low. His hazel eyes darted from Royce to Luke. I saw his truck. Near the old sawmill road. Cages in the back, under a tarp. He pointed with a shaking finger. It was him. I swear. Royce's pale eyes snapped to the boy, glinting with danger. Careful what you say, kid. His tone hissed like a knife unsheathed. Luke stepped forward, blocking the path, voice hardening. That's enough. The mist thickened, raindrops tapping Valor's fur. Royce's smirk returned, though his jaw twitched. You've made yourself a problem, Maddox. Problems don't last long in these woods. He shifted his weight to step closer. And Valor erupted. A thunderous bark split the air, echoing through the trees. Teeth bared, stance unyielding, the shepherd was a storm unleashed. The pups inside whimpered, Toby stumbled back, and Royce froze mid-step. Luke's voice cut through the standoff. Leave. You won't scare me, and you won't touch them. For a moment, silence. Then Royce sneered, cigarette flicked into the mud, boot grinding it out. This isn't over, Marine. He turned back to his truck, engine roaring, tires spitting gravel as he vanished down the lane. Only when the tail lights disappeared did Valor ease back, still rigid, still watching. Luke's hand found the scarred head. Good boy. Irene's face was lined with both worry and resolve. The old sawmill, she murmured. That's where people say cages are. You do well to see for yourself. But be careful. Men like him don't fight fair. Toby's voice cracked, but his eyes held steady. I wasn't lying. I saw dogs inside those cages. Luke gave a single nod. I believe you. He looked down the rain-slicked lane. Royce's tracks might wash away, but the shadow he cast had only grown. That night, Luke didn't hesitate. He called Ben Ortega, a county animal services officer in his 40s. Stocky, olive-skinned, with a buzzcut and a weary edge, Ben had seen too many barns filled with neglect. Life had hardened him, but he still carried biscuits for strays in his jacket pocket. His intolerance for cruelty was carved from grief, his younger sister killed by a drunk driver years earlier. Since then, he had sworn not to ignore preventable suffering. Beside him came Dr. Leah Monroe, the town's veterinarian. Mid-30s, auburn hair tied messily, her pale green eyes held patience honed by years of calming broken animals. Widowed young, she had poured her grief into her work, tending farm animals at midnight, treating pets for families who couldn't pay. Tonight, her medical bag hung heavy on her shoulder, lips pressed thin. The three met at the fork where the gravel road bent toward the old sawmill. The structure had been abandoned for a decade, its roof sagging, timbers rotting, windows boarded or broken. Locals whispered of raccoons in the rafters, or worse. Ben adjusted his flashlight. Reports put Royce's truck here more than once. If he's holding dogs, they'll be inside. No waiting. Quiet and fast. Luke nodded. Valor shifted, nose lifted toward the breeze, hackles twitching. He already knew. They crossed the overgrown yard, boots crunching through weeds and shards of shingles. The wide doors were chained, rust sagging the hinges. A smell hit them before entry, ammonia, waste, and the copper sting of blood. Leia covered her mouth with her sleeve. Inside, darkness swallowed them, pierced only by beams of light. The silence pressed heavy, until claws scraped metal. Whimpers muffled by bars. Luke swept his flashlight across the floor. Cages. Rows of them. Dogs crammed inside, pit bulls with raw patches, beagles curled tight, shepherds with ribs sharp beneath matted coats. Eyes blinked back at the light, wide and desperate. The stench of neglect clung to everything. Leia dropped to her knees by a cage, whispering. A spaniel inside lifted a paw through the bars, filthy ears matted. She blinked hard, fighting tears. We can't leave them. Not one. Before Luke could answer, Valor stiffened. His head whipped toward the shadows. A lanky figure bolted, a boy barely 20, cap low, lighter in hand. Likely a lookout, one of Royce's recruits. Valor lunged, leash snapping taut. He slammed the youth to the ground, sending the lighter clattering. The boy scrambled until Ben cuffed him with a knee to the back. One less problem, Ben muttered. Luke's light swept deeper. In the corner sat a cage apart. Inside lay a large German shepherd, muzzle gray, frame gaunt. His back leg dragged uselessly from an old brake. Around his neck hung a rusted tag. The letters faint, but enough, Chief. Luke's chest clenched. He crouched, meeting the dog's gaze. The eyes were steady, disciplined, unbroken. The shepherd gave a low whine, tail thumping faintly. Hold on, old boy, Luke whispered, fury in his hands as he wrenched the lock. The door screeched open, and Chief stumbled into his arms. Valor approached. For a long moment, the two shepherds faced each other, one scarred by abandonment, the other scarred by service. Then Valor leaned forward, licking Chief's muzzle, a gesture of brotherhood. And then the silence shattered. Valor approached. For a long moment, the two shepherds faced each other, one scarred by abandonment, the other scarred by service. Then Valor leaned forward, licking Chief's muzzle, a gesture of brotherhood. And then the silence shattered. Barking erupted, first one, then all. Whines, yelps, howls rose like thunder, demanding freedom. Leia snapped open locks with trembling hands. Dogs spilled into aisles, limping, bounding, crying out for release. The air shook with their voices. Outside, the night erupted with sound as they poured into wet grass. Barking rose against the misty sky, not fear now, but triumph. Luke held Chief against him, heart pounding. The line drawn yesterday had become more than defiance. It was a battle cry. Morning broke clear, mist rising from the pines like smoke. Luke's cabin no longer stood in silence, it bustled with movement. Neighbors arrived with tools, children darted between kennels, dogs barked in excitement. What had begun as one man's rescue was now a gathering of hands and hearts, answering cruelty with care. Luke worked alongside them, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand. Sweat mixed with sawdust along his brow. He still moved with a marine's economy, precise, measured, but something softer had returned. He laughed when boards slipped, when pups nosed at his boots. Valor sat like a sentinel, overseeing the chaos. Now and then he barked once, sharp, commanding. The three rescued shepherd pups immediately scrambled into line, their wobbly bodies swaying, tails crooked. The volunteers burst into laughter, murmuring that the old war dog had taken rank as drill sergeant of the Haven. A hand-painted board leaned against the porch rail. The letters. Irene herself sat beneath the birch tree, ladling steaming stew into bowls for weary workers. At 71, her body was wiry, her hands stiff with arthritis, but her voice carried authority. Eat before you faint, she scolded one young man who tried to skip his meal to keep hammering. Her lines deepened when she smiled at the pups nosing her apron. Toby Reed, thin and restless with the energy of 10 years, darted about the yard. His sandy hair stuck out from under his cap, sleeves flapping over his hands. In his grasp he carried a balloon twisted into a red heart. He crouched by a trembling terrier mix hiding in a corner. Holding out the balloon, he whispered, "It's just for you." The pup crept forward, pawed the string, then barked shyly. Toby's laughter rang across the yard like a bell, suddenly only a child again, not a boy hardened too early by loss. Dr. Leah Monroe moved steadily among the makeshift kennels, auburn hair tied back, medical bag slung across her shoulder. Her hands were quick, steady, wrapping a beagle's paw, giving vaccines, soothing with low murmurs. Children gathered to watch, curious, and she let them hold her stethoscope to hear the beat of a puppy's heart. Her grief was never spoken aloud, but those who saw her work knew it guided her touch. Among the helpers was Earl Jennings, a retired carpenter in his 60s. Shoulders broad, beard white, he swung his hammer with the precision of decades. "If I can build kennels," he said, "maybe I can build peace with myself, too." He had carried shadows from Vietnam for years. Few argued with his reason. By midday, fences rose, kennels took shape, straw spread across new pens. Dogs barked in a chorus, not desperation, but eagerness. People moved like a hive, scrubbing bowls, painting signs, hauling water. The silence that had haunted Luke's cabin was gone, replaced with community. Adoption day came sooner than Luke expected. Word had spread, dogs needed homes, and homes were waiting. Families arrived, children clutching leashes, older couples with softened hearts, teenagers eager for companionship. The yard buzzed with laughter and voices. Valor held post by the porch steps, watching like a general, while the pups tumbled nearby under his watchful eye. One family stood apart. Marcy Dalton, a kindergarten teacher in her early 30s, came with her daughter Emma. Marcy was petite, light brown hair pinned in a bun, her smile warm but shadowed by grief, her husband lost in a car crash 2 winters ago. Emma, 6 years old, cheeks flushed pink, eyes wide, spotted a floppy-eared shepherd pup. She crouched, whispered something, and the pup leapt into her arms, trusting without hesitation. Emma giggled, stumbling backward with delight. Marcy's eyes filled as she stroked the pup's head. "He's perfect," she whispered. At that moment, Mayor Robert Keene stepped onto the porch, puffed with formality, notes in hand for a speech. Stout, balding, he cleared his throat theatrically. But Emma's new pup had other plans. Wagging furiously, it bounded past and snagged the mayor's papers, scattering them into the sky. For a heartbeat, silence, and then laughter burst across the yard. Children chased fluttering pages, adults chuckled, and even the mayor cracked a reluctant grin. Emma squealed, hugging her pup tighter. To her, it was the best trick in the world. Luke stood back by the porch rail, arms crossed, watching. For the first time in years, his chest loosened. The yard rang with laughter, children played, families gathered, not out of fear, but hope. Valor leaned against his leg, tail thumping once. Luke rested a hand on the dog's head, voice low. "Looks like we built more than kennels, old boy. We built a haven." The sun dipped behind the pines, painting the yard in amber glow. Against the porch leaned the sign. Northstar Haven, every life is a star. The storm rolled into Coeur d'Alene with the smell of thunder long before the first flash split the sky. Clouds churned like a restless sea, their bellies swollen with rain. At Northstar Haven, the dogs sensed it first, tails stiff, ears flicking, whimpers threading through the pens. Luke stood on the porch, lantern in hand, scanning the tree-line. He had long learned to trust both dogs and weather, both carried warnings. Inside, the shepherd pups tumbled across the quilt, still innocent to the weight pressing on their guardian. Valor sat by the door, amber eyes fixed outward, body tense in the way Luke knew too well from their service overseas. Storm or not, something was coming. And then it appeared. At the far edge of the yard, near the half-built hay barn, a figure slipped from the shadows. Even in the flicker of lightning, the bulk was unmistakable. Royce Madigan. Rain plastered his leather jacket to his frame. His scarred face gleamed ghostly as he struck a match against the barn wall. Flames hissed alive, orange bleeding into black, spreading Valor leaned against his leg, tail thumping once. Luke rested a hand on the dog's head, voice low. Looks like we built more than kennels, old boy. We built a haven. The sun dipped behind the pines, painting the yard in amber glow. Against the porch leaned the sign. Northstar Haven, every life is a star. The storm rolled into Coeur d'Alene with the smell of thunder long before the first flash split the sky. Clouds churned like a restless sea, their bellies swollen with rain. At Northstar Haven, the dogs sensed it first. Ben Ortega charged through the gate, stocky frame moving with surprising speed. His voice cracked with urgency, "Get the pens open, now." He tore at latches, and frightened dogs bolted into the rain. Inside the barn, smoke curled thick. Luke forced the heavy door wide, coughing, arms straining. Flames chewed at rafters above. Valor darted past him, silhouette swallowed by haze. "Valor!" Luke shouted, but the shepherd didn't falter. Through the smoke came a sharp cry, the yelp of a trapped pup. Pinned beneath a fallen rack, tiny legs flailed. Toby spotted it first. Without pause, he dropped to his belly, wriggling through embers. "Hold on," he cried, reaching with thin arms. Valor lowered himself over Toby, shielding the boy as embers rained. Heat seared his fur, but he pressed closer, guarding both child and pup. Outside, Irene Foster charged forward, fire extinguisher nearly half her size clutched tight. Her shawl was soaked, her wiry frame trembling, but her jaw set. She yanked the pin and sprayed, foam hissing wild. A neighbor shouted, "Irene, you're fighting the storm, not the fire." "Then the storm will have to listen," she barked, pressing harder. Inside, the barn groaned. A beam crashed, catching Luke's shoulder and throwing him hard to the ground. Smoke blurred his vision, heat clawed his lungs. Valor lunged, teeth locking on Luke's jacket, growling as he hauled with everything left in him. "Pull, boy." Luke gasped, pushing against the floor. Toby scrambled, shoving at Luke's back with all his strength. Together, dog pulling, boy pushing, Luke slid free just as the beam slammed down behind him in sparks. The three tumbled into the rain, coughing, gasping, but alive. The blaze roared, but the storm answered. Thunder split the sky, sheets of rain poured, hissing against fire. Neighbors formed a chain, buckets flying, water dousing sparks with frantic unity. At the fence line stood Royce Madigan, drenched, smirk twisted in firelight. He turned to flee. But headlights swept the yard, sirens wailed, deputies pouring in with weapons drawn. Hands up, voices barked. Royce froze, rain plastering his hair. Too late. The metal of a lighter glinted in his pocket. Officers seized him, pressing him against the fence as the dogs barked, not in panic, but fury, triumphant at last. Luke crouched in the mud, Valor pressed against his side, Toby leaning into his shoulder. In the boy's arms, the rescued pup whimpered, alive but wide-eyed. Luke looked between them, the soot-streaked boy, the scarred old shepherd, the fragile life saved, and knew the haven had survived more than fire tonight. It had survived cruelty's attempt to break it. The courthouse in Coeur d'Alene was a red brick building that had weathered decades of storms and scandals. On the morning of Royce's trial, its steps overflowed. Farmers with mud still on their boots, shopkeepers closing early, children clutching parents' hands. The whole town came, drawn by the need to see cruelty confronted. Inside, oak benches gleamed under brass lamps. Luke sat near the front, posture straight, the Marine still in him visible. Valor lay at his feet, sable fur brushed dull, bent ear twitching. Age and scars couldn't dim his dignity. The town knew he belonged, he was their silent witness. At the defense table sat Royce Madigan. Shackles dulled his swagger, but the sneer still clung to his face. His lawyer, Daniel Cross, thin and balding, shuffled papers nervously, known for taking cases no one else wanted, and even he seemed doubtful of the fight ahead. Across the aisle sat District Attorney Claire Danner, sharp-featured, hair cropped short, movements precise. Years ago, she had lost her younger brother to violence in a dog ring. She never spoke of it, but it burned behind her eyes. She had built this case with a ferocity that left Royce little room to slip. Evidence piled like storm clouds, photos from the sawmill, rows of cages, dogs scarred and starving, the rusted tag that read Chief. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom, gasps at the images. Witnesses described the fire at Haven, Royce's lighter still in his pocket when caught. The case was heavy, undeniable. But still, testimony was needed. And so the town waited. The trial began with stillness thick in the air. Royce Madigan sat shackled at the defense table, bulk diminished, leather jacket gone, prison orange glaring under courtroom lights. His pale eyes swept the room with contempt. District Attorney Claire Danner rose with precision, her voice sharp and clear. She laid out the case with ruthless order, photographs from the sawmill flashed on the projector, cages stacked, ribs showing, the corroded tag stamped Chief. Murmurs filled the benches, gasps breaking as each image flickered by. Then came testimony. Neighbors described flames leaping at Haven, Royce caught with a lighter still in his pocket. One after another, voices built the storm. Finally, it was Toby Reed's turn. The boy sat at the witness stand, legs too short to touch the floor, sneakers swinging nervously. His sandy hair stuck up despite his mother's combing, his hazel eyes darting toward Luke for reassurance. His small hands gripped the edge of the box, knuckles pale. Claire's voice softened. "Toby, can you tell the court what you saw that night?" The boy swallowed hard, voice thin but steady. I saw his truck. Near the old mill road. There were cages under a tarp. And that night, at Haven. I saw him light the fire." His words trembled, but courage anchored them. Royce leaned back, smirking. When Toby's eyes flicked to him, the boy's jaw clenched. He didn't look away. Daniel Cross, Royce's weary lawyer, rose for cross-examination. Adjusting his glasses, he tried for patience. "Now, Toby, you're just a boy. Isn't it possible, in the storm, in the dark, you were mistaken?" The boy fidgeted, lips parting to answer, when a loud, deliberate yawn filled the room. "Valor." The old shepherd sprawled at Luke's feet, jaws stretched wide, tongue curling in theatrical timing. The sound echoed across the chamber, slicing through the lawyer's words. Laughter rippled through the benches. Even the judge hid a smile behind his gavel before rapping for order. Toby giggled, nerves breaking, and sat straighter. "I wasn't mistaken," he said firmly, voice stronger now. Luke felt pride swell in his chest. The boy who once sold balloons in silence now stood against cruelty in open court. When testimonies ended, Claire delivered her final plea. She gestured toward Valor. "Ladies and gentlemen, if words alone are not enough, look here. A dog who has scars from years of service, yet shields life instead of destroying it. Do we let men like Royce Madigan tarnish creatures like him, or do we mark today as the end of cruelty in Coeur d'Alene?" Her voice pressed into the room like a weight no one could ignore. The jury did not take long. They returned with the verdict heavy and clear, guilty. On multiple counts, animal cruelty, arson, reckless endangerment. Royce's sneer faltered for the first time. Judge Harold Greer, tall and stern, delivered the sentence, 25 years in state prison. No parole for the first 10. Applause broke in the gallery despite the gavel's protest. The town exhaled, as if chains had been cut loose from its shoulders. As people filed out, Luke lingered. Dr. Leah Monroe found him, green eyes tired but bright. The fundraiser worked, she whispered. Chief will get surgery. Braces, maybe even a cart. He'll walk again. Relief trembled in her voice, as though the shepherd's healing was her own. Outside on the courthouse steps, Toby stood clutching a balloon dog Valor had let him tie that morning. The rain had cleared, sky pale blue above. Luke crouched, pulling the boy into his arms. You were brave, Toby. You've been a hero. Valor stepped forward. With slow, deliberate weight, he lifted one broad paw and placed it gently on Toby's shoulder. The boy froze, wide-eyed, then broke into the widest grin of his life. Someone whispered, a knighthood from a shepherd. Neighbors chuckled softly, but no one doubted the meaning. Toby Reed, the boy who once wished $6 could save 3 pups, had been christened something greater that day, a guardian in his own right. Spring came to Coeur d'Alene with a quiet transformation. Snow melted from the ridges, the forest breathed green again, and the yard around Luke's cabin no longer looked like a construction site patched with hope. Northstar Haven now stood whole. Fences sturdy, grass trimmed into play yards, kennels lined neat, a small clinic wing painted fresh. At the front, carved posts held a bold sign. Every life matters. Luke leaned against the porch rail one morning, coffee steaming in his hand, watching life unfold. The 3 shepherd pups, once huddled in a rusted cage, now bounded free. Their coats thickened into glossy sable, ears, save for one stubbornly floppy, stood high. They circled Valor, leaping at his tail, tumbling over his paws. Valor endured with the patience of a veteran. When he barked once, sharp and commanding, the pups scrambled into a crooked line, tails wagging sheepishly. Luke chuckled, warmth filling a space that had long been empty. Life had grown in Haven, not just for dogs, but for people. Toby Reed now wore an oversized volunteer's vest, its hem nearly to his knees. He filled water bowls, cleaned kennels, ran across the grass with the dogs. More than that, his mother Janet found her place too. Janet, in her late 30s, hair tied back in a braid, had carried grief and exhaustion since her husband's accident. Nights cleaning offices had worn her thin. But here she found steadiness. Luke gave her part-time work keeping the books and helping with supplies. She had a knack for order, and her laughter came easier now when she saw her boy's face bright with joy. Under the birch tree, Irene Foster gathered children on a quilt, her wiry frame bent as she told stories. Some were from her girlhood, others invented on the spot, tales of Duke, the shepherd she lost long ago, of loyalty, of stars guiding the lost. Her hands, lined but expressive, lifted toward the sky. Stars aren't just lights, she told them. They're reminders of lives that once shone here. Children sat cross-legged, dogs curled beside them, eyes wide as they listened. In the small clinic, Dr. Leah Monroe moved with practiced grace, auburn hair tied back, sleeves rolled above her elbows. She treated strays and farm animals, barn cats and rescues, charging what people could afford, or nothing at all. Her green eyes softened when she looked out at the yard, as though finally glimpsing a future stitched from small mercies. And then there was Chief. The old shepherd had survived the mill, scarred but unbroken. Thanks to the town's fundraiser, he now walked with a custom harness and a wheeled cart supporting his hind leg. The contraption looked clunky, but Chief moved with dignity, tail wagging faintly. One afternoon, a couple arrived, Thomas and Sarah Whitaker. Thomas was broad-shouldered, grease-stained hands of a mechanic, hair streaked with early gray. Sarah was tall and willowy, auburn hair long, smile reserved but warm once earned. They had lost a child years before to illness, a grief that had never left them. Sarah knelt before Chief, stroking his muzzle with thin fingers. His amber eyes met hers. She whispered, "We know about broken things." Chief leaned into her palm. The decision was made. Days later, Luke stood by as the Whitakers guided Chief into their truck, harness secured, eyes bright with hope. The rhythm of Haven carried on. Evenings brought neighbors lingering after work, sharing stew or biscuits, laughter mixing with the dogs' yips. Luke sat on the porch with Valor at his side, children chasing pups across the grass, Irene's voice weaving stories beneath the birch. The silence that had haunted the cabin was gone. In its place lived the hum of belonging. Evening painted the lake in shades of violet and fire. Luke walked to the water's edge, the air cool with pine and fresh earth. Beside him padded Valor, steady as always, with the 3 shepherd pups bounding close, tangling themselves in playful knots. Luke crouched, resting his hand on Valor's thick fur. His voice was low, almost reverent. "You've done more than guard me, old boy. You've been the North Star. You led them all home." Valor exhaled, a long, weary sigh, then lowered himself onto the grass. The pups curled against him immediately, pressing into his warmth, small bodies safe within the circle of his frame. Luke stood, watching as the last light bathed them in amber, the scene glowing like a blessing. Behind him drifted the sounds of Haven alive with life, children laughing, Irene teasing Toby about spilled stew, Janet's soft chuckle, Leia calling dogs back to their kennels. Voices wove with the dogs' playful barks, filling the twilight with belonging. For the first time in years, Luke felt the war inside him grow quiet. Cruelty had been faced, justice served, and in its place something new had bloomed, not silence, but laughter. Not emptiness, but family. Sometimes miracles are not thunderbolts or voices from the heavens. They are small choices of compassion, a soldier's hand reaching for his wallet, a boy refusing to look away, a dog who shields life with his own body. Through them, God whispers that every life matters. That even from ashes, hope can rise again. As this story closes, carry its light into your own days. Notice the quiet miracles around you, a neighbor who needs help, a stray needing kindness, a heart needing encouragement. Remember that God often works through our hands, our words, our willingness to care. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in second chances and in the miracles God places on our path, type Amen below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you, and may His light guide you, just as a shepherd once guided a family, a town, and a marine home again.